Hey everyone, it's Ray from Being Bookish. I figured out a fantastic way to start 2024 would be to take a look back at my favourite and not so favourite reads of 2023. So today I am going to do a countdown of my top 10 favourite reads and my bottom 5 least favourite of the last 12 months. I'm going to start with the bottom 5 favourites, so 10 through 6. And then I'm going to take a look at the 5 books that I wish I hadn't picked up in the first place. So starting with book 10 of my favourites, we have Joe Nothin's Guide to Life by Helen Fisher. This book made me cry. It is the story of Joe, who is suffers from OCD, and after the loss of his father, he struggled to adjust. However, his mum, sensing that he needed structure, started writing a guide to life. While she had given him guides to things to do in the kitchen, how to make a meal, where to find all the foods and everything else, she also started writing a beautiful guide on how to make friends, how to help people, and how to know when to take a step back. What she didn't account for was the fact that she was going to sadly pass away. And Joe Nothin's Guide to Life is the story of how he makes his way through while adjusting to no longer having either parent in his life. It is a wonderful story, and if you haven't read it, I really do recommend it, especially if you love books that make you cry. The next one is probably going to surprise quite a few people. Book 9 on my list is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I enjoyed this book. In fact, I enjoyed it so much I have read it twice. I read it once when it came out back in May, and second time when Iron Flame was coming out in November. However, the longer I think on it, the more I realise that while I enjoyed it, it was not deserving of a place in my top 5. Obviously, if you've read the book, you know that it is a very good story of dragons and dragon riders. But I will say that the book, I enjoyed The Sky Riders by Kerry Law far more, and would recommend that particular series, the Sparks trilogy, over this one. However, I read the first 2 books in that series in 2021 and 2022, so they don't class for 2023's reading list. Book 8 on my list is the debut by Amelia Hart, Wayward. This is a Waterstone special edition, which is absolutely gorgeous to look at, and the story within is even more stunningly written. I would say that if you love historical fiction, this is a book you really need to pick up, and as I said, it is a beautiful edition. Book 7 on my list is Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldry. I read this one when it came out. In fact, it came out the same time as Iron Flame, and I would honestly say I preferred this. I enjoy cozy fantasy. It's not something I actually discovered until 2023. So when I picked this one up, I couldn't resist. Again, Waterstone special edition, and it is a continuation, though it is a prequel, for Legends and Lattes, which you may see later on. Book 6 I have mentioned in my shorts, and that is The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. This is a wonderful adventure story. It has pirates, sea creatures, a voyage of discovery, and action, fights, demons, you name it, it's got it in there. But it's also very well written, so this one really should be on your list if it hasn't already appeared on it. Now, I thought that I would break things up, because I have a further 5 in my top 10 countdown, with a look at my least favourite reads of this year. The first one on my list is actually surprising to me, and that is The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England by Brandon Sanderson. This was one of his secret projects, a book that he wrote during the wonderful thing that occurred in 2020. And while I think I was expecting far more from it than I got, having previously enjoyed works by Brandon Sanderson, I was expecting something that was more along the lines of a kind of fantasy historical Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and what I got was a little bit more of a mishmash of confusion, and there seemed to be very little, if any, structure to it. I ended the book wondering why I'd bothered finishing it myself, so this would have potentially been a DNF had I not decided that I wanted to read through a bit more of my TBR. So yeah, this one was a little bit disappointing, and I'm very sad about that because I do like Sanderson's work. The next book on my list was actually one I did for a book tour, and that is You Again by Kate Goldrick. I honestly think that this book was not written with someone in my particular demographic in mind. I am a woman in her late 40s, and I think that the relationship structure and lack of commitment, and well, actually not even the lack of commitment, but the way that the relationships worked and the way that the characters were so incredibly blasé about everything just didn't sit very well with me, and I struggled with the read. I picked this one up for a book tour, so thank you to the publisher for sending it to me. However, I don't think this will ever go on my read again pile. Book 3 on my countdown may be a shocker to some and definitely not to others, and that is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is the second book by Reid that I have read, and the first one was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I loved the story style of that. I enjoyed Evelyn's character. I did not enjoy the secondary storyline, and with this one I found I came away disliking all the characters. I didn't think that I didn't enjoy any of the characters. I didn't like the story. I spoke with a friend who said that what she enjoyed about it was that she listened to it as an audiobook. Anyone who knows me will understand I struggle greatly with audiobooks, so I never ever pick them up. I don't think they are not reading. I think they are a way of reading. They just aren't one that suits me, unfortunately. So when I picked up Daisy Jones and the Six by Jenkins Reid, I struggled with the writing style, and I do think that it probably does work better as an audiobook with multiple character voices. I found that this massive plot twist they were promising all the way through the book was a bit of a damp squib at the end of it all. I was expecting something hugely explosive, and I didn't get it. So yeah, this book was not one that I will be revisiting. It is a very beautiful edition. I do love the very 1960s, 1970s style cover, but I just didn't enjoy the story. Sorry. The next book on my list is Death and Croissant by Ian Moore. I love myself a cozy crime or a cozy mystery. However, the way that this one was written felt very convoluted, very confused. It just didn't deliver, and I was expecting food, and there was no food at all, especially surprising given it was based in France. So there we go. Book 2 on my least favourites list was Death and Croissant by Ian Moore. Book 1 was one of my only 1-star reads of the year. There are a few more. One of them was a book by Reverend Richard Coles, which I actually passed on to a friend because she was reading it for a book club and didn't particularly want to purchase the book for herself. She has now since passed it on to somebody else, so it's being gifted, and I feel that it was money well spent thanks to that. However, Icebreaker by Hannah Grace was my number 1. Did not enjoy it at all on the list. Again, I think that this probably wasn't written with someone of my age and my demographic in mind, but I do think that the elements of relationship, constant bedroom encounters, and everything to do with the main characters just did not sit well with me. It wasn't an enjoyable read. It was one that I nearly DNF'd, and earlier this year when I was reading bad sex scenes for a charity read-along, this book came top of my list for scenes that really stank. Sorry, again. Okay, now we've dealt with the unpleasantness for 2023, I'm going to get back to books for 23 that I enjoyed. Book 5 on my countdown is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. Yes, I have already mentioned Bookshops and Bone Dust, that was book 7 on the list. I loved this book, and if I hadn't enjoyed it, I don't think I'd have ever picked up Bookshops and Bone Dust. But I have recommended this to multiple people since I read it, and every single one of them has come back and said, loved this, thank you so much for recommending it. I really couldn't believe I'd never heard of it before. So that's Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. Book 4 on my list is a YA science fiction, and it's the first in a trilogy. I read 2 trilogies by this particular duo of authors in 2023, and while I enjoyed both of them, I have to say that the Aurora Cycle by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman was my favourite. It was fantastic, and I actually went and invested in the majority of Kristoff's work. I need to find some Kaufman. So Aurora Rising, which is the first in the Aurora Cycle, which ends with Aurora Burning and Aurora's End, is a fantastic introduction. The writing style is very clever. The characterization is very well done. I loved all of the characters in this book. They seem to have a great affinity for creating wonderful and enchanting voices. Primarily their computer systems, because in the Illuminae files it is Aiden, who I have to say was probably my favourite character in that series, and in the Aurora Cycle it is Magellan, Aurora's handheld computer. So yes, Aurora Rising, Aurora Burning and Aurora's End are a fantastic trilogy, and I am very glad that I had them all to hand when I started reading them, because if I'd had to wait like many people did when they first came out, I'd have probably been champing at the bit far more than I was between Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. Book 3 on my list, we are down to the final 3 books. Book 3 on my list was In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune. This one came out earlier this year, and it's again another beautiful Waterstones edition. I am not a fan of the Pinocchio story, and when I was younger I had nightmares over the Disney Pinocchio film. I was taken to see it for my 4th birthday, and ever since then I haven't been able to watch it, and I'm not sure if it's the donkey scene or the sheer horror of the film in general that I couldn't cope with. However, In the Lives of Puppets is a stunning retelling, so well written, as everything seems to be by Klune. I've read quite a few of his, and I have a few more on my TBR, and I also have pre-ordered the long-awaited sequel to House in the Cerulean Sea, which comes out in September. This retelling that has been slightly modernised with computers and AI of Pinocchio is just everything. It is so incredibly well done, and I fell in love with all of the characters. There wasn't one character in this that I didn't like, from Little Rambo, the automated remote controlled vacuum cleaner, to Nurse Ratched, the nurse who isn't really very good at her job and is incredibly bossy. They were all so well done that if you haven't read this yet, like many of the other books on my top 10 countdown, I would say you seriously should pick this up if you even if you don't like the Pinocchio story like I don't. If you enjoyed Klune's previous works, this is one for you. Number 2 on my countdown is actually very, very different from everything else on it, and that is Yellow Face by Rebecca F. Kuang. This was her book of 2023. It is a sad indictment of the publishing industry, perhaps probably as it really is, given certain events that occurred towards the latter part of the year. Again, this is a Waterstones special edition, very lovely design, and it looks great on my bookcase, but that is irrelevant. The story is very well thought out. It has been written in a style you cannot deny that it is written in a very good style. Her use of language is impeccable, and the story itself is horrifying. There is not one character in this I think you are meant to like, but at the same time you cannot stop reading. I read this in one day, actually one afternoon, and I found I couldn't put it down. I was carrying it when I went to make a cup of tea. I was carrying it and reading it when I went to answer the front door and I was having a conversation with the postman. I was still reading the book surreptitiously down at that, sort of held it down underneath the eye contact that I was struggling to make, which is kind of rude, but at the same time I think that was definitely an indicator of how good and how enjoyable this book was. Not that it wasn't a nice story, but I don't think it's meant to be. It was very eye-opening, and if this is how the publishing world is for some people, then things definitely have to change. My final book, number one on my list, has been number one since I read it for the first time, and that is Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati. I am a huge fan of Greek mythology, and the story of the Trojan War has been one that I've been fascinated with since I was probably about 6 or 7 years old, when we did an interpretation of the Trojan War without a lot of the gore, obviously, because we were very young children, at my primary school. I played the role of Cassandra, and obviously Cassandra and Clytemnestra, their stories are very closely intertwined, courtesy of King Agamemnon. Casati's story is beautiful and tragic. It's heartbreaking. I rolled through so many emotions when reading this book, and I just couldn't put it down. It is, as you can see, this is yet another Waterstone special edition. But I also read this as a NetGalley proof, and this is an indicator of how much I enjoyed it. I went out and purchased it as soon as I had read it. I pre-ordered it because I knew that I wanted to add it to my collection. This is very well written. It is a beautiful story that is incredibly sad, because though we know Clytemnestra from her wonderful dealings as the murderer of her husband, and then the victim of matricide courtesy of her daughter Electra, what we don't take into account is the fact that there are so many things that got her to that point. She was waiting for a very long time to get revenge on her murderous husband for killing not just one child, her daughter Iphigenia, but also a newborn son that she had had with her first husband. So all of those things pulling together, myths from Homer, from Ovid, from so many authors in that period of time, and taking a more sympathetic look at what she experienced, definitely made this book a tragic but beautiful story. So there you go. There is my number one recommendation and my number one read of 2023. Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati. And if you haven't read it and you enjoy Greek mythology, please do pick up a copy, because it is so amazing. And that's my countdown for 2023. I know that there are loads more. I read over 160 novels in 2023. However, these are the ones that stick out and I continue to remember. Have you read any of them? If so, what did you think? Do you disagree with my countdown? Do you think that one of my bottom 5 should be in my top 10? I'd love to know.